I want to comment on this tweet posted yesterday by Sarah Salviander, which has gotten some attention online, including a lot of criticism. I want to defend her tweet. She says, "There is no evidence or argument you can present to me that would convince me God doesn't exist, any more than you could provide evidence or arguments to convince me that I don't exist. The question left open to me is how I should live knowing what I know." Now, again, she got a lot of criticism for this by people saying she's being irrational and closed off to evidence. And she then provided this response. She said, "Well, if you're an atheist and think this is an L, I guess that's loser. Is that what there's reference to? L for critical thinking? You're mistaken. There are two things of which I'm 100% certain. I exist, and I'm not the explanation for that. The naturalistic explanation is too limited, too incoherent. I simply cannot believe it." Okay, so I want to offer a defense for this claim. Now, I'm not saying that I necessarily am in the same place as Sarah Salviander, but I want to give a defense for what she's saying here. Um, First thing I want to say is that what she's, and this is my interpretation. Now, it is interesting that somebody commented on her tweet and interpreted it as an affirmation of Alvin Plantinga's view of proper basicality. And she actually had a finger pointing down and tweeted that and seemed to be agreeing with that person's interpretation of her tweet. Ironically, I think that's mistaken because Alvin Plantinga doesn't have the view that nothing could convince him that God doesn't exist. He has a view that theism and Christianity is properly basic for him, but that he could lose justification in it. And presumably by implication that he could potentially stop believing in it. William Lane Craig, on the other hand, has defended a view of what he believes Christianity to be ultima facie, or to be such that it could never become unjustified to believe it. So maybe William Lane Craig is a little closer rather than Alvin Plantinga. So I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with everything as to the way Sarah Salviander might interpret her own tweet. I'm going to give you my take on what I think is going on here. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is I think what is going on here is it's a commentary on one's own psychology, on the fact that one psychologically could never be in a position to doubt. Now, in terms of epistemology and arguments, that's just a different kind of topic or issue. What is simply going on here is that she is stating a fair degree, I think an admirable degree of self-awareness about her own psychology, saying that she is in a place such that she could never doubt either God's existence or her own existence. How to interpret that? Well, I think one way to interpret that is she is saying she could never be in a position she currently believes where there would be sufficient evidence such that it could outweigh her conviction that she exists or her conviction that God exists. Let's start with the first claim. I believe I exist. I assume you believe that you exist. Ask yourself this question. Do you think that there's any argument that could be sufficiently compelling such that it could overwhelm your belief that you exist? Now, for some people, there are such arguments. For example, there are people who are Humean bundle theorists. So they believe in a Humean view of the self, and they may draw as a consequence of that the surprising claim that as an individual, they don't actually exist. There is a user illusion. Fair enough, there may be such people. But I will say that on the belief that I exist, I am currently in the position that I don't think there could be an argument. I don't anticipate there being any argument sufficiently compelling that it could convince me that I don't exist. I think my belief in my own existence will always have a stronger force, will outweigh any contrary view. Here's another thing that I believe, to go beyond Sarah Salviander's tweet. I also believe that objective moral good exists and objective moral evil exists. And I know that there are all sorts of arguments out there for moral anti-realism and moral relativism and moral skepticism. But I will say that I currently am of the belief that none of those arguments, I think, could ever be sufficiently compelling to convince me to believe that there are no such things as objective morally good acts and objectively morally evil acts. Now, what I'm doing when I make those observations is simply stating what I think is a psychological fact. That's where I am. That's how I think about the world. That's These are certain beliefs to me are so compelling, belief in my own existence, belief in objective moral good and evil, that I just don't think there's going to be any counter evidence or arguments that could be sufficiently compelling to compel me to give up those beliefs. Sarah Salviander, in her list, also puts belief in God there. She says that belief in God is also among those things that she finds to be so compelling that she could never, she believes that there would never be evidence sufficient to get her to disbelieve it. On that one, I'm not quite in the same boat. While I'm a Christian theist, in terms of the belief in God's existence, to me, it is not as compelling psychologically as belief in my own existence. I hope that's not heresy for you. That's simply a description of my own doxastic attitudes. Um, and so that's where I'm at. So I think on that account, I do believe that there is conceivable that there could be evidence that could cause me to question my belief in God's existence. But I don't think that there's evidence that could be sufficient to get me to question belief in my own existence. Sarah Salviander disagrees. Well, in fact, she doesn't disagree. What she's simply saying is that her psychology of belief is different than mine. So she doesn't even actually disagree. She would only be disagreeing with me if she said a rational person ought not have that position. Right? Then we could have a disagreement. But if she's simply stating her own psychological belief and I'm stating mine, we need not be disagreeing at all. Now, here's the last question to consider. Is she somehow being irrational for having this degree of self-awareness in terms of what she finds compelling and not compelling? I don't think there's anything irrational about that at all. I don't think she's closed off to evidence at all. I simply think that she has an admirable degree of self-awareness as to how compelling she finds certain propositional truth claims, such as that I exist, where I refers to Sarah Salviander and is spoken by her, and where God exists, that she believes those are very compelling claims. And they're so compelling that she believes that nothing will ever come along which will undermine those claims, get her to abandon or question those claims. And she's free to do that. It's a free country. And again, I think she has an admirable degree of self-awareness over her own doxastic beliefs and the status of certain beliefs within her noetic structure or her structure of belief. So to conclude, I don't find anything problematic about this tweet at all. I think that she's to be commended for being upfront about arguments and evidence and truth claims and what she finds to be compelling and what she finds to be less than compelling.